Yeah, why is this wizard's beard flip-flopping between 320 by 200 and 640 by 200 resolution? Yeah, I can barely tell what's going on either, and I'm the one playing it. Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're taking a look at Savage, one of the strangest games I've ever come across, which feels like its creators had come up with a bunch of fantasy characters and creatures and art, and decided to just toss it all into a blender and turn it into a game, while writing out a surprisingly large story to adhere it all together. I mean, when I first took a look at a few screenshots of this game, I thought it was going to be a hack and slash of some kind with giant sprites and figured, sure, works for me, let's see what it's like. Well, not only is it not a hack and slash, it doesn't even have the same method of play between its 3 different levels, starting you out with a platforming segment where you throw axes, moving on to a first-person environment where you dodge obstacles and toss magic attacks, ending with flying around as an eagle while churning out hundreds of golden eggs. I mean, at least you can't say the game lacks variety. Savage was originally developed by Probe Software and released for a trio of 8-bit home computers in 1988, with the DOS port coming the next year in 1989, being published through MicroProse under their Microplay label, and it's effectively a one-player action game. In terms of audio, it only supports the PC speaker, but in terms of graphics, things are slightly confusing. So the way Savage was coded, different graphic sets were supplied for the CGA and EGA versions, which came on different disks, meaning your choice of disk determined if you were going to be loading CGA or EGA graphics. More curious than that, though, is that most of the EGA graphics are made to be displayed at 320 by 200 resolution. However, there are some exceptions where some higher resolution graphics are present on the EGA side of things, facilitating that some aspects of the game run at 640 by 200 resolution, even though most of what you see on screen is 320 by 200 graphics. I'm really not sure what the rationale was for doing things in this manner, since the few things which are at a higher resolution are often difficult to notice. As for its current release date, the game's still commercial, and while it can be purchased from GOG and Steam easily enough as a digital download, for some curious reason, it goes for a premium on both sites, being priced at $7, whereas most other retro titles in either service tend to be priced at $6. And then again, it goes on sale frequently, so unless you really want to play this game right away, it's best to wait for a sale. Physical copies, on the other hand, well, I've got good news and bad news. The good news is that there's virtually no demand for this game, so you can find sealed copies for as little as $20 if you get lucky. The bad news, though, is that this game is not only very rare, but very difficult to search for because of the sheer number of games and gaming-adjacent things which use the word Savage in their name. Not helped by this game coming out on a variety of different platforms. Thus, you have to be cognizant of which platform the copy you're looking at is for, and it's often difficult to tell unless it's flat-out stated by the seller. So yeah, getting a physical copy of this game is not a fun prospect, but thankfully, not an expensive one. When you first boot the game, you're presented with the following menu, which allows you to run the introduction, begin playing any of the 3 levels of the game, redefine the keyboard controls, enable joystick support, or quit the program. The introduction sequence is kinda hard to follow because of the scrolling text, but fortunately it's pretty much taken word for word straight out of the manual, so you can just read it in the manual if you're so inclined. And have a copy, given that I know the GOG release does not come with one for whatever reason. That said, there's practically nothing in the story of any consequence. The game is centered around a person by the name of Savage, who's been taken prisoner by a force known as the Dark Guardians. The first level involves escaping the castle Savage is being held prisoner within. The second level revolves around Savage attempting to flee the area through a place known as Death Valley, only to discover that his maiden is also being held prisoner in the castle. Thus, for the last level, Savage returns to the castle and has his trusty eagle scout within to find the cell his maiden is being held within, so that Savage can free her, be reunited, and live together in peace. I swear, this story is 19 paragraphs long and feels like a complete afterthought to the actual gameplay. I will also point out that it may seem curious that you can effectively choose which level you intend to play right from the start. Well, this isn't quite the cheat you may think it is. If you elect to play the second or third level at any point in time, it's going to ask you for a password. In order to play the level effectively, you need to know those passwords, which are obtained by clearing the first and second levels. However, if you don't know the password, you are still allowed to play those levels, but you're not given any extra lives, which, given the difficulty of this entire experience, probably isn't going to end well. So, let's go through what's involved with each of the 3 levels. Here in the first level, you're playing Savage as he is, from a side-scrolling perspective. You can run, you can jump, you can crouch, and you can toss axes. Most of the upper half of the screen is utterly useless, save for the bits in the middle, which show pips to represent your extra lives, a score counter, your remaining energy on the left vertical gauge, and your accumulated bonus points on the right vertical gauge. The energy is lost at a constant rate, as well as from taking hits from enemies, and if you run out of energy, you lose a life. If you lose a life while you have none remaining, the game ends, you're given a final score tally, and you go back to the beginning of the level. Now, after watching this frantic gameplay for the past few minutes, you might be wondering how on earth I can tell what's going on or what I'm even doing. And I will say, there is some logic regarding what's going on. It's not a complete fustercluck. Some of the enemies do appear at random, but there's also a number of enemies which have very specific placements because of what they provide. For instance, these blue things, I don't know what you call them, take several hits to destroy, but always drop a power-up which makes you immune to physical impacts with enemies, taking out those enemies in the process even when the enemies involved are mini-bosses. But it only lasts for a short while. To that end, many times after collecting one of these power-ups, you want to just run as fast as you can to make as much progress as you can, since you'll be nearly invulnerable. Defeating the mini-bosses also gets you an orbital shield, which lasts for a little and destroys enemies on contact, but the trouble with the mini-bosses is that they all have attacks which can kill you in a single shot, no matter how much energy you have left. Thus, unless you can take out a mini-boss quickly and safely by knowing its attack pattern, you may be better off just avoiding the fight altogether, as you're not required to take out any of the mini-bosses to succeed. However, about halfway through the level, you start to encounter the fire pits. At first, this section is going to seem impossible, but the trick is that while Savage is not given a lot of leeway for landing jumps, he is given a lot of leeway for starting them. Thus, you can practically run all the way off of a platform and still be able to make a jump from it. But if you jump too soon, you're absolutely going to miss the landing on the other side. Also, when you get to the second set of lava pits after ascending upwards, the platforms there do this weird thing where they slowly fall and also slow down Savage's movement. Now, these are trickier to jump from because the timing isn't super obvious at first, but once you get used to it, they're not too bad either. Still, with everything that's going on, despite the fact that you can theoretically beat this entire level in only a few minutes, it took me about an hour to clear it for my first time because, yeah, it's as difficult as it looks, and it looks insane. And essentially, I have 3 big tips for survival. The first, always stop to get the power-ups which make you semi-invulnerable, because being able to just run forwards for a moment without any cares is kinda helpful. My second tip, if you aren't able to survive to your first major energy refill with all of your lives intact, just restart immediately, because you're probably going to need all of your lives to succeed. My third and final tip, though, is that you cannot take things carefully. There's too much going on, and you're constantly losing energy. Thus, the best way to play this game is as if you were speedrunning it. Go forwards as much as you can and only slow down or stop when you hit sections you can't just blaze your way through at full speed without taking tons of damage or losing lives. There's a handful of such spots, but for the most part, you'll want to always be moving. The second level is a bit misleading at first because it seems like the goal is to escape and dodge the oncoming monoliths, which seems like maybe that's the case because the monoliths do indeed increase in quantity the further you get. But no, this is not a time trial in the slightest. There are 4 sections of this level to clear, and you clear these sections by taking out a specific quantity of enemies using your magic attacks. Once the right number of enemies have been dispatched, you move on to the next section. The first and final sections have stationary skulls to take out, the second section has bouncing green demon heads, and the third section has giant stone faces. One thing you have to be extremely careful of though is that from the second section onwards, the enemies can fire spinning glass orbs at you which cannot be intercepted with your magic and are guaranteed to kill if they come in contact. The only saving grace is that you often can see them coming a mile away, thus giving you a chance to get as far away from them to the side as possible. But they can be fired well before an enemy even comes on screen, so on rare occasions you may get hit by one of these orbs completely out of nowhere because it was mostly off screen during its trip and ended up on screen at exactly the wrong moment to impact and kill you in an instant. Again, this level could be beaten in only a few minutes, but it took me an hour to pull it off because there's just so much to dodge and the perspective on the monoliths is very weird. However, one trick which ultimately helped me survive is to only pay attention to one side of the screen at a time. While it is technically possible for the monoliths to form patterns you can't weave between, it's actually pretty rare, meaning if you only focus on one side of the screen at a time and not the other side, it'll be a lot easier to tell how the monoliths are moving relative to your own movement and will make dodging them a lot easier. Don't get me wrong though, this is still a very difficult sequence either way you slice it. The third and final level has you taking control of Savage's trusty eagle, who is never given a name. Now, I'm going to mention right off the bat that there's some pretty gruesome death scenes for this eagle, which I will be cutting around so that no one watching has to see that. Just be aware that they exist should you decide to play this game on your own accord. The way this works is you fly simply by pressing up and can shoot eggs straight down by holding down, or fire them forwards with your fire button. The trick is that you don't have a lot of viewing space as the eagle, so it's really easy to accidentally fly up or fall down into deadly things. Thus, you have to move up and down very carefully and always be ready to reverse course if something dangerous pops up. However, this level ends up being way easier than the other two, for a very simple reason. While you do have an energy bar here, just like in the first level, it recharges simply by defeating enemies. Now, just like with the first two levels, it only takes a few minutes to beat this level, and I cleared it on my second attempt ever. Again, so long as you're paying careful attention to what's above and below you and reacting accordingly, there's little to go wrong. Oh yeah, one last thing to point out is that because so much effort was put into the PC speaker music, this is a game where you can either have only music playing back, or only sound effects. And the sound effects... yeah, maybe don't play with the sound effects. The music is so much better. Overall, I really don't like this game. Savage has all the trappings of a very creative and imaginative gaming experience, but calling it frantic is a massive understatement. There is so much going on at any one moment that you can't play this game with a casual mindset and survive. Now, that's not a strike against the game, that's just my personal reason why I'm not a fan of it. But if you enjoy gaming experiences which are designed to be extremely difficult and overwhelming, while still technically being possible, then by all means, give this game a shot. You're probably going to have a higher chance of liking it more than I do. So the way to set this up to run best in DOSBox has a couple of steps involved. In terms of configuring DOSBox itself, you want to set a fixed cycles count of 1500, or you can adjust this to preference, but I found 1500 to be the best to go with. Except, when you start playing, this is going to feel way too fast. The next step, once you start playing the game, is to press the S key a whole bunch of times to slow the gameplay down to its minimum internal speed. And the reason it's best to do it this way, and not by simply setting a lower fixed cycles count, is because the speed of the gameplay becomes a lot more consistent with this approach. Whereas, if you were to set the cycles count to a comfortable value for the default game speed, there will be much bigger fluctuations in game speed as the action gets more or less intense. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up, 2 Saturdays from now on March 22nd will be a filler, and I'm going to be taking a look at yet another modern indie title which I want to give some attention to, which seems heavily inspired by both an old NES title as well as an old Genesis title. Thus, make sure to stay tuned to see which game it is and to learn which 2 retro games it's taking inspiration from. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. If you'd also like to support the show directly and get some extra perks, then head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.